in a dusty Texas town where the only music came from cicadas and busted engines. An 11-year-old girl diagnosed a car by sound alone, no scanner, no gauges, just her ears and instinct. But when she told a NASA engineer exactly what was wrong with his vehicle, what happened next shocked everyone in the garage and changed the way science thinks about sound forever. This story of how a girl diagnosed a car by sound and sparked a nationwide movement of young innovators is more than inspiring. It's a reminder that brilliance doesn't always come with a degree. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where in the world are you listening from. You're part of something bigger here. Let's begin. In a sun-baked corner of Marlin, Texas, a dusty little town halfway between nowhere and yesterday, an 11-year-old girl named Ava Whitmore crouched barefoot beside a battered 1996 Saturn. The engine was dead silent now, but not to her. To Ava, it had spoken. All she'd needed was 30 seconds. A single sputter, one cough and a high-pitched squeal on ignition, and she knew it wasn't the starter motor, wasn't the battery, wasn't anything the adults around her were guessing. It was the crankshaft sensor, hairline fractured, intermittent signal, dead giveaway if you knew what to listen for. Everyone in town knew Ava's grandfather, Mason Whitmore, the best mechanic west of Dallas, even if arthritis now kept him to one hand and half a wrench. But no one expected her to be the one diagnosing cars by ear before she'd finished 6th grade. And certainly no one not the dusty old men in the auto shop, not the traveling engineer from Denver, and especially not the NASA propulsion specialist who happened to be filling gas next door, expected that Ava's gift would change the way the world thinks about engines, sound, and who we should be listening to. The air in Whitmore's auto repair was thick with the smell of oil, rust, and burnt coffee. The kind of place where old mechanics didn't talk much, just nodded when a fix was done right. That morning, a navy blue SUV had rolled in, coughing and wheezing like a sick animal. The driver, a tall, quiet man in jeans and a weathered NASA windbreaker, had stepped out with a confused frown. "I've had it in 2 shops already," he said. "Still won't hold ignition after idle. No codes, no warnings, just dies." Mason Whitmore adjusted his glasses and walked around the car slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. Could be a fuel line. Could be your IAC valve. Hell, might be a software glitch. The man nodded. "That's what the last guy said." From the back of the garage, Ava wiped her hands on a rag and quietly approached. "Can I try?" she asked, her voice so soft the room almost missed it. The NASA man raised an eyebrow. "You," Mason chuckled. "This here's Ava. Don't let the braids and bare feet fool you. She hears things machines don't even know they're saying." The man glanced at Mason, then at the girl, then shrugged. "Sure, have at it." Ava leaned into the driver's seat, turned the key. Once. Twice. She didn't look at the dashboard, didn't ask for a scan tool. She just listened. The engine turned over with a strained whir, followed by a high-frequency whistle that most ears would have missed. She stepped back, eyes narrowing. "It's not your fuel or sensors," she said. "Your harmonic balancer's misaligned, probably by less than a millimeter. That whistle that's belt slip at mid-load, which means your crankshaft sensor is getting uneven timing pulses. That's why it shuts off after idle." Silence. The man stared. Mason blinked. "I was going to say that next." "No, you weren't," Ava smirked. Still silent. The man opened the hood, looked down, then carefully unbolted the lower shroud. Sure enough, the harmonic balancer had a faint wobble, barely visible but enough. "My team didn't catch this," he said under his breath. "We ran diagnostics for days." Ava shrugged. "Your diagnostics don't have ears." He stayed longer than most customers. Over lunch in the garage's tiny kitchen, just peanut butter sandwiches and iced tea from a dusty jar, the man finally introduced himself. Dr. Elias Carrington, propulsion systems engineer, contracted with NASA's Experimental Mobility Lab. We've been working on real-time acoustic diagnostics for aerospace vehicles, he explained, trying to detect malfunctions before they cause failures. And here you are, already doing it. Ava raised an eyebrow. I just listen. You listen right, he said. We've trained AI models to recognize audio anomalies in test engines. It takes weeks to train them. You heard it in seconds. Mason leaned back, arms crossed. Told you she's something else. Elias Carrington studied Ava for a long time. You ever consider working with sound analytics building tools, helping us understand what we can't detect? Ava looked confused. You mean, at NASA? He smiled. I mean, with anyone who still believes machines are only data. What you have, that's intuition. That's what we're missing. 2 weeks later, a package arrived in the shop addressed to Miss Ava Whitmore, mechanical consultant. Inside a brand new digital oscilloscope, a laptop preloaded with NASA's acoustic analysis software, and a handwritten note. Let's build something together, Ys. It was the first time Ava had ever seen her name printed like that. Not Mason's granddaughter, not that weird engine girl, but consultant. She didn't need approval, but she'd never had it offered so freely. And somewhere deep inside, something shifted. She realized maybe she wasn't just a kid with good ears. Maybe she was about to teach NASA something they'd forgotten, that a hum, a knock, a whisper in metal meant everything. If you knew how to listen. 2 months later, the town of Marlin. Texas was still buzzing about the girl who heard engines better than scanners. The local paper had run a front-page story. Tourists started pulling over just to take photos outside Whitmore's garage. But none of that fazed Ava. She kept showing up every morning at 6:30 with her worn-out denim overalls, hair tied back in a messy ponytail, and the same beat-up headphones slung around her neck not for music, but for analyzing sound waves on her new NASA laptop. What no one expected was the call that came next. It was early, before the sun even lit the shop floor. The landline rang something that rarely happened anymore. Mason picked it up, mumbling a groggy hello. A sharp, tense voice answered. This is Colonel Dana Wilkes, liaison with the NASA Vehicle Propulsion Test Command. We've had a failure. We need your granddaughter. Mason sat up straight. Excuse me. Our test engine prototype shut down mid-sequence. No error code. No heat signature. It just stopped. We're blind. And Carrington said she might be the only one who can hear what's going on. An hour later, a white government SUV rolled into the dirt lot. 2 engineers stepped out, both stiff, polished, and completely out of place in a town that still used handwritten receipts. Ava looked up from under the hood of a half-rebuilt Ford Ranger. You need help with your car, she asked. One of them, a tall woman with dark eyes, looked at her and said flatly, We think you can help with ours. They flew her to Edwards Flight Test Facility in California, where the hum of machinery was constant, and the pressure was 10 times worse than any school exam. The prototype in question, a compact, high-thrust engine designed for Mars rovers, sleek, silent, and terrifyingly sensitive. Months of work had gone into its creation. Billions in funding. It wasn't supposed to fail. Yet here it was lifeless. Ava stood quietly beside it, while a room full of senior engineers stared. Dr. Carrington approached her with a pair of headphones. We recorded the last 15 seconds before shutdown. Everyone's reviewed the data. No red flags. See what you think? Ava took the headphones, closed her eyes, and listened. The room filled with murmurs and sidelong glances. She played the sound again, and again, then opened her eyes slowly. It's your cooling ring, she said softly. It's not failing. It's vibrating. Carrington frowned. There's no vibration data in the logs. That's because it only vibrates when pressure exceeds 82 kilopascals. Right at that point, the outer coil starts resonating barely. It's throwing off a high harmonic pitch, just above human hearing. That pitch is disrupting the ignition sequence. The room went dead quiet. A senior systems analyst leaned forward. How the hell did she catch that? Ava shrugged. It sounded wrong. Like something was humming out of tune. Like a violin string about to snap. The team ran diagnostics again. This time, using audio mapping the way Ava described. And there it was, plain as day when visualized through her method. A tiny spike at 22 kHz, right before ignition collapse. They hadn't been deaf. They'd been too smart to listen like she did. Carrington turned to the team, redesign the ring assembly, use staggered coils to disrupt resonance, and write this down, analyzed by Whitmore protocol. Ava's jaw dropped. Wait, you're naming something after me. He grinned. You didn't just fix the engine. You created a diagnostic model that might prevent failures in deep space propulsion. That's engineering. That's legacy. Back in Marlin, as the sun set over the dusty hills, Mason leaned against the front porch, watching the news on an old portable TV. The headline rolled across the bottom. 11-year-old girl's hearing helps NASA solve major rover engine crisis. He chuckled to himself. Not bad for a kid who used to tap on lawnmower hoods like they were musical instruments. And far above, in a hangar full of men in lab coats and degrees, one little girl in grease-stained overalls was teaching them all a new language. The sound of precision, the sound of trust, the sound of future. 2 weeks after the Edwards breakthrough, Ava Whitmore found herself sitting in a NASA conference room far too big for someone who still hadn't hit her teenage years. The walls were lined with plaques, models of Mars landers, and group photos of people in white jumpsuits with names stitched into their chests. People with PhDs. People who'd written textbooks. People who had never needed to ask a child for help. But here they were asking. She sat at one end of a long glass table, her denim overalls clashing awkwardly with the polished suits and digital tablets. At the other end, Dr. Mallory Keene, Director of Systems Integrity for Deep Exploration Missions, tapped her pen against the table. Let's be honest, she said, looking around. What Ava did wasn't luck. It wasn't even intuition. It was skill, raw, natural pattern recognition at an audio level none of us are trained to interpret. Ava squirmed a little. Dr. Keene smiled at her gently. And we need to change that. That's when it hit Ava. She wasn't just helping them solve a problem. She was forcing them to rethink how they understood problems in the first place. After the meeting, Dr. Keene pulled her aside. Do you know how many engineers we've passed on because they couldn't fit inside the mold we built? She asked. How many brilliant minds we've ignored because they didn't test the way we wanted them to? Ava hesitated. I'm not even good at school. Exactly. Keene nodded. But you're fluent in a language most of us forgot listening. They walked together down a quiet hallway, lined with glass offices and technical charts. On one wall was a framed photo of a broken heat shield that had once nearly ended a mission. Do you know what caused that failure? Keene asked. Ava shook her head. A barely audible oscillation in the insulation panels. Nobody heard it. Nobody thought to listen. You would have. That moment stayed with Ava. She started thinking about the shop back in Marlin, about how many times she'd listened to rumbles and squeals and clunks no one else had noticed. But she'd never thought of it as special. It was just how her brain worked. Now, it was starting to feel like maybe it was her superpower. Back home, the shop was quiet. Mason had hung a newspaper clipping on the wall, Texas girl teaches NASA a lesson in sound. He said he didn't care much for journalists, but he sure liked that headline. Ava returned to her routine like nothing had changed. She rotated tires, cleaned fuel filters, tuned lawn mowers. But now, people came from 3 towns over just to see the girl with NASA ears. One evening, as she was cleaning carburetor jets on an old Honda, a kid about her age rode up on a rusty bike. He stood awkwardly at the garage door, holding a small transistor radio. "I heard about you," he said. "I got this radio that's been making this weird popping sound. Everyone says it's junk, but I don't know. It sounds like it wants to work." Ava wiped her hands and walked over. Curious. She clicked the dial, tilted it, listened close. Then she smiled. "It's your capacitor, just one. It's leaking charge and sending short bursts. Probably salvageable." The kid's eyes lit up. "Wait, seriously, you can hear that?" She nodded. "You can too. Just gotta know what you're listening for." He stared at her like she was magic. And in that moment, Ava realized something deeper than any NASA medal or headline could ever give her. What she had wasn't just hers. It was teachable. That night, as she lay awake in her small room above the shop, Ava stared at the ceiling fan humming its steady rhythm. Her laptop buzzed softly beside her, loaded with waveform data from a new rover simulation Dr. Carrington had sent. But her thoughts weren't on Mars or engines. They were on that kid with the radio, and on every other kid like him. The ones who weren't failing, they just hadn't been heard yet. By spring, something had changed in Ava Whitmore. She still showed up to the garage every morning, still had grease under her nails and her headphones slung around her neck. But her hands were now just as familiar with waveform software and acoustic heat maps as they were with carburetors and spark plugs. Her world was growing and fast. Emails came in every day. One from a physics professor at MIT who said her instinctual diagnostic matched something he'd been trying to model for 2 years. Another from a group of German aerospace engineers inviting her to a virtual symposium. Then came the most unexpected of them all. A formal invitation from the NASA Innovation Outreach Division asking Ava to create and lead a pilot mentorship program for students across the country, especially those in underrepresented communities, teaching sound-based diagnostics and mechanical intuition. The program would be called Project Soundshift. Ava blinked at the letter, unsure how to react. "I'm not even in middle school," she muttered, rereading the words. Mason just grinned. "And yet, they want you to teach them. Ain't that something?" The goal was simple to find kids like Ava, kids who listened differently, who couldn't always explain why they knew something, but could hear or feel that something was wrong. With NASA's support, Ava and Dr. Carrington began designing a curriculum, but Ava insisted on one thing. No slideshows, no textbooks, just noise, hands-on parts, and a place to get it wrong 100 times before someone tells you you're smart. Her voice cracked a little when she added, "Because no one ever told me." The first Soundshift session took place in a small, run-down high school auto shop in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where the only diagnostic tools were rusted and the audio monitors didn't work right. Ava walked in carrying her old toolbox and a beat-up portable speaker. She set it on the desk, plugged in a USB stick, and hit play. The students looked confused as a strange, rhythmic whir filled the room. "What do you hear?" she asked. A girl in the back shrugged. "Just like a fan." Ava smiled. "What else?" A boy leaned forward. "There's a pop, like a bubble bursting. Repeating." "Good," Ava said. "Now listen closer." She hit pause, then replayed it again, this time slower. "That pop, that's a failing capacitor in a rover prototype engine. It started as a soft sound, got louder, then vanished just before total failure." The room went quiet. Then one kid raised his hand. "Wait, You can fix a machine before it breaks just by listening. Ava nodded. If you know what to listen for. And in that moment, something shifted. A dozen pairs of eyes no longer saw a girl from Texas. They saw themselves finally given permission to be curious in the language they understood. By summer, SoundShift had expanded to 5 cities. Then 10. Old mechanics came out of retirement to help. Retired Navy engineers offered to mentor. Even schools without functioning auto shops asked for virtual kits. Ava had designed herself kits made of broken parts, strange clicks, and missing bolts, ready for any kid with good ears and brave guesses. NASA funded it. MIT studied it. But the kids lived it. They weren't being graded. They were being trusted. One day, in a video call with Carrington and Keene, Ava presented a new idea. What if we start recording the emotional patterns, too? Carrington tilted his head. Emotional. Ava nodded. Every time an engine makes a sound, someone nearby feels something. Stress, fear, anticipation. What if we recorded that along with the waveform? What if emotion is part of the equation? Keene leaned back, stunned. You want to quantify human response as part of failure modeling. Ava looked down, half nervous. I know it sounds weird. Carrington shook his head. No, it sounds like genius. Back in Marlin, the shop door creaked open one evening. Mason was inside, tinkering with a busted chainsaw. Ava stepped in, holding a thick envelope. They approved my patent application, she said, beaming. For the acoustic emotional diagnostic method. It's official now. Mason looked up, misty-eyed. Ava, your name's gonna be on real science, on paper, in space. She sat beside him on the old bench. I just wanted to fix stuff, she whispered. I never thought it'd fix me, too. By the time she turned 12, Ava Whitmore wasn't just a mechanic's granddaughter in Marlin anymore. She was a published inventor, a guest lecturer, and for thousands of kids across the country, a symbol that brilliance doesn't always come in a lab coat. But Ava, she stayed the same. She still tied her hair up with the same frayed elastic band, still wore her denim overalls, now patched at the knees, still walked through her town like she hadn't just helped NASA reimagine propulsion diagnostics. When people asked what changed her most, it wasn't the awards, or the cameras, or the time she got a handwritten letter from the president thanking her for inspiring a new generation of engineers. No, it was a moment no one else saw. She had been visiting a middle school in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, one of the new SoundShift sites. The school didn't have much outdated tools, flickering lights, a cracked garage floor, but the kids were wide-eyed and hungry to learn. At the end of the workshop, a boy named Malik stayed behind. He was quiet. His shoes were taped together, and he clutched a hand-built radio he wouldn't let anyone touch. Ava crouched beside him. Want to tell me about it? He hesitated. It only works sometimes. I don't really know why. She smiled. Let's find out together. They sat cross-legged on the floor as the other students filed out. Ava held the radio to her ear, then played it again through her laptop's analyzer. After a few seconds, she pointed at a single spike in the sound map. There. That blip. It's your solder line. It's not sticking, it's breathing. Malik stared. Breathing. Yeah, she said, smiling. You ever fix something and it works for a while, but then acts up again later? He nodded hard. That's what it sounds like when it wants to hold together but doesn't know how. For a long second, he just looked at her. Then he whispered, That's kind of how I feel. That moment cracked something open in Ava. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made room for something deeper. She'd always thought of engines as machines, functional, problem-solving, black and white. But the more she listened, really listened, the more she heard the people in the machines. The fear in a sputter, the frustration in a misfire, the hope in a hum that almost catches. Machines were mirrors, and kids like Malik. They didn't need fixing. They needed translating. Back in Marlin, Ava brought that lesson home. She started recording not just waveforms, but the voices of the kids she mentored, how they described the sounds they heard. Some said it whines like a scared dog. Others said, it growls like my stomach when I'm nervous. She began building a new interface, half software, half storytelling, that allowed users to tag engine sounds with emotional markers. She called it the feeling machine. When she showed it to Dr. Carrington, he stared at the screen for a full minute before saying a word. Ava, this is revolutionary. You're mapping empathy into diagnostics. I'm not doing it, she corrected him. They are. I just made a way for people to see what they already feel. As the project grew, so did Ava. Not in fame, though, that certainly followed, but in purpose. She began mentoring kids who'd never held a wrench. She started writing letters to teachers, urging them to see the fidgeters, the whisperers, the ones who draw gears in the corners of math tests as potential innovators. She returned to schools not with slide decks, but with broken parts and open ears. And everywhere she went, she told one story. A story of a girl from a small town who heard a broken sound and believed it meant something. Not because she had data, but because she had instinct. One night, long after the shop closed, Ava sat on the hood of her grandfather's old truck, staring up at the stars. Mason walked out and handed her a soda. Still dreaming big. She smiled. No, dreaming right. He chuckled. You've changed, kiddo. I've grown, she corrected, but only because someone made room. And with that, she leaned back, listening not just for machines anymore, but for every quiet voice the world tried to tune out. She knew now fixing engines was only half the story. The rest was about helping people believe their voice was worth hearing even if it sounded different. At exactly 7:42 a.m. on a cool fall morning, a red light blinked on at the Johnson Space Center. Inside a glass-paneled control room, dozens of scientists leaned toward their monitors as a live feed streamed telemetry data from a prototype rover being tested on the harsh terrain of Chile's Atacama Desert, a location chosen for its similarity to Martian soil. It was the final diagnostics run before NASA declared the vehicle space-ready. Every system had passed inspection, except one. The propulsion module. It had failed twice already, for reasons the engineers still couldn't explain. They rebooted, ran it again. This time, no errors. But one engineer, a young woman trained through Ava's SoundShift program, paused. She squinted at a subtle fluctuation in the accompanying audio file. Then she leaned forward, heart pounding. It's doing it again, she whispered. A supervisor looked over. There's no code flag. All signals read nominal. She shook her head. Listen. They played it again, through a high-fidelity headset. The pitch wasn't obvious, not to the untrained ear, but she'd learned this from Ava, the tight, strained harmonic just before a coil gave out. She turned. We need to shut it down now. They did. Upon inspection, a tiny stress fracture was found in the torque converter, microscopic, invisible to scanners, but not to sound, and not to those who had been taught to hear it. Ava got the call that afternoon. Your student just saved us from a catastrophic failure. She didn't cry. Not then. She just smiled. Not because it was a victory, but because it was proof. Proof that her work wasn't about being the prodigy from Marlin, Texas. It was about starting a ripple one that reached rooms and missions she might never enter herself. Weeks later, Ava stood under the lights of a small stage in Houston, the youngest keynote speaker at the International Acoustic Diagnostics Summit. She wore clean overalls, still denim, but now with her name stitched in gold thread, A. Whitmore, founder, SoundShift. She took the mic with quiet confidence, and the room fell still. I used to think machines broke because we missed something. She began. Now I know they break because we stop listening. Not just to them, but to the people who feel them differently. She scanned the crowd. Some were engineers, some were students. Some were kids just like her watching from live streams in classrooms far away. And if we want to build things that last not just machines, but movements, then we need to stop measuring brilliance by degrees and start measuring it by attention. A pause. Because someone out there is already hearing the next failure before it happens, and they're waiting for us to take them seriously. The applause lasted nearly 5 minutes. Afterward, a little girl with oversized glasses and a rusted-out hearing aid waited in line just to hand Ava a note. It read, "I don't hear like other people, but I feel the sounds. Like inside my chest. Is that okay?" Ava knelt to meet her eyes. "It's more than okay," she said. "That's your superpower." Later that night, Ava sat alone at a cafe overlooking the Houston skyline, her laptop open to a new file. She titled it, "The Next Layer: How Emotion, Sound, and Memory Intersect in Failure Detection." And then she closed the laptop and just listened. To the buzz of neon, to the hum of the air vent above, to the faint whisper of a passing bus with loose suspension, and to something deeper, something few had been taught to recognize. Potential. Because in a world racing toward automation and digital perfection, one girl reminded us that sometimes the most advanced diagnostic system is still a human heart with a good ear and the courage to speak what it hears. The end. Up next, 2 more stories of everyday brilliance you won't believe. Click to keep listening, and if this one moved you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to be heard.